I found an article from a Smithsonian magazine published about 20 years ago, and I know you're thinking, well, he's cleaning out the attic, or he went to the library. No, there's only one other place that you can find magazines that old. I was at the doctor's office. But it was a great article. The cover declared, "Baseball as it was meant to be played." The article was about the vintage baseball leagues that have been gaining popularity around the country since the 1980s. It's baseball back to the very beginnings of the game. Baseball in its pure form, some would say, before Pete Rose and Roger Clemens, and you can fill in the blanks of your other players who you think have tarnished the image of baseball. Before skyboxes and billion-dollar stadiums and $60 nosebleed seats. Vintage. It's back to the basics. Some grass, some wooden benches under the shade trees for the spectators, a round home plate, because research has shown that what the first home plate was a plate, a metal dinner plate whose somebody's mom was not very happy about, and a field of bare-handed guys, because in the early days, only the catcher got to wear a glove, a thin leather glove. And then as the pitching went from underhanded to overhanded, some pitchers started stuffing their glove with raw meat to cushion it a little bit. A catcher with a porterhouse in his glove. Now that's baseball, some folks would say. Some folks read Acts 2 and say, now that's church. And I think that's probably what Luke intended in some ways. He wants it on the record, what it was like in the earliest days. But did he think it was worth mentioning because it was quaint, like the quaintness of a hand-wound yarn ball covered with hand-stitched leather? The description of those earliest days of the church, maybe it just wasn't something you were seeing anymore, even just 40 to 60 years since the birth of the church when Luke was writing Acts. Or was his description of church so much a part of who they still were decades into the enterprise that he wanted to answer the question, well, exactly how long has it been this way? From the very beginning, maybe Luke was saying. Is that why he tells us what it was like? We've spent over 2,000 years trying to figure out this church stuff. Every 4 years, give or minus a pandemic year, the United Methodist Church gathers as a general conference, trying to discern what does it mean to be a faithful church. You see, it's happened for centuries now. Every time someone gets it just like they think it ought to be, they let some human beings get in on it, and it messes things up. Because wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there is the promised presence of Jesus and just enough people to disagree about something. And when they can't work it out, they pick up their marbles and go down the street and start a pure version of church. What do we do with what the book of Acts tells us about the church in its baby stage? If we could just launch a vintage church league, what would it look like? Would we be able to get enough players for a team? And exactly what rules would we go by? I mean, it's been over 2,000 years. Baseball's not even 200 years old, and there are different sorts of vintage leagues. You can play in the 1887 league, and the pitching is overhand. Or you go back to 1866, it's underhand, and the ball caught on its first bounce is an out, much to the distress of every batter and the delight of every infielder. You've got some decisions to make if you opt for vintage. And I guess we'd have to decide some things about vintage church, pure church, even if we just stuck with Acts 2. Never mind the whole history of the Christian faith. Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves, and see, we've already got a problem there. They, it says, some folks insist that church means them and Jesus, just the two of us. I can worship on the golf course or the lake or the beach or the jacuzzi. Believe me, I've heard them all. You start to sign up people for vintage church and they say, if it just weren't for all these people. And I'd say, that's a nice thing, but it isn't church and it isn't the Christian faith. It's nice and all, but we're talking about something entirely different. So I think we've probably lost a few players off the vintage church roster right away because of those annoying other people. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of the bread and prayers. I think that means that they worshiped together. Teaching, fellowship, communion, prayers. And of course, there would be some that are all for that, and some would say, well, I just want to come for the teaching part and then slip away home. Or if you'll sing my favorite songs, I'll think about it. But I'm thinking we could get at least a team's worth, a whole league maybe, of folks who believe that worship and learning and fellowship and praying, that's church. So let's say we've got a roster. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. A place where miracles happen. Now, there might be some a little spooked by that, but I suspect we would have some players who would say, I have not given up on all. I need some place in my life where holy things happen, where things I can't quite explain away are still possible, where what is broken can be mended, where what was dead lives again. I could play on a team like that. And I think we've got a schedule going. All who believed were together and had all things in common, where they would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. And all of a sudden the field is empty, the locker room cleaned out, not a peanut to be found in the concession stand. The league has dissolved. By far, this is the quaintest of the things that the early church did. You can find any number of commentaries who go on and on about the simple-mindedness of these early believers. Of course, this primitive experiment in communism, socialism, etc., was doomed. And everyone quickly points out that there's no evidence that this particular behavior, selling everything, pooling resources for the needs of the community, survived much beyond the first century, if even that. And I can imagine if I announced today, okay, if everyone would go home this week, liquidate all your assets, and get ready to make the biggest offering that we've ever had, and then if anyone needs anything, just give us a call. Lock up the women and children, Gertrude, he's starting a cult. But if we can look past the weirdness and look past our own need to hang on to so much, could we at least agree that for these early believers, their faith went all the way to their pocketbooks? That one response to the grace of God in their lives was to be generous, concerned about the needs of others, giving in ways that they had never thought that they could give because they had been touched by the love of God. Is that what it sounds like to you? It's what it sounds like to me. That's what it was like in the good old days. Day by day, as they spent time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. They spent time together, and we are longing for that day to return to us. They ate together. You can always get a crowd when you feed them. But my favorite line of the whole description of the church is in this verse. They broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts. Glad and generous hearts. Doesn't that sound wonderful? If you ask me, what do you want right now for your life? What do you want to be like when you're 85? What do you want for your kids, your grandkids? I don't know if I could do any better than that. Glad and generous hearts. Now, what do you have to do to get to that place? I have a feeling it has something to do with the worship and the fellowship and the hope and the giving and the being together, all the stuff we've been talking about. But if you could pull together a team and could guarantee that at the end of the season you'd have a bunch of folks with glad and generous hearts, don't you think you could get somebody to sign up? They had the goodwill of all the people, it says. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. With all of that going on, of course, folks were signing up. In vintage baseball, the guys and the girls, some girls play too, they just have to wear the uniforms that make them look like guys, because in the 1860s, girls didn't play ball. But the folks today who play vintage baseball are devoted to it. I don't know that they knew entirely what they were signing up for. A few just happened to catch a game at a state fair and they were hooked. Others had loved baseball all their lives, and they were thrilled beyond belief when they found that other people were as crazy as they were. Some now have scars to prove their participation. No glove baseball means that there are a few broken fingers, a few dislocated thingamajigs. I don't know if they knew what they were signing up for, but it doesn't seem to stop them. They want to preserve something of pure baseball as they see it. And a lot of people, kids, high schoolers, college players, pros, and people old enough to know better, all play some form of the game. Not exactly pure. Some put on gloves and helmets, settle for 3 strikes and 4 balls instead of 4 strikes and 5 balls of the good old days. Now there are umpires, when in the old days the home team brought the preacher or the mayor or the sheriff, one of the honest people in town, to referee the game. These days, some put a ball on a tee and get so excited when they hit it that they run to second and then third and then to second. And some spend hours in the batting cages, practicing, taking lessons, getting coached. Others just go out and have a good time. But they all say it is for the love of the game. How is it that you first became part of the church? How has it changed? How has it changed you? Do you have any trophies or scars to show for it? How pure are we? How like those first believers? I know a lot has changed. The world has changed. The church has changed. People are different, maybe. But some of it still has a familiar ring. Teaching and fellowship, bread and prayers. Most of those things, most every Sunday, all came upon them. And I've seen some awesome things in my time, wonders that cause me to believe that God can do mighty things. Healing, hope, forgiveness, a fresh start. I have seen folks make incredible personal sacrifices to help someone in need. Words rush to mind. Storm recovery, kids hope, food bank. And I am praying that we continue to become a church of people who will let their faith reach all the way to their checkbook, their personal planner. Glad and generous hearts. I see it right here. And some working in that direction. Praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day after day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. It has happened. It started at an auditorium down Dalrymple Street. We're starting a church. Would you come join us? And it happens today. It could happen even more, and we could be the ones that help make it happen. We're church. I can't vouch for exactly how pure it is. We get some things right and fall embarrassingly short on some others. But I'm guessing that we would all say, at least on our best days, it's all for the love of God. It's all for the love of God. Amen.